An underwater photographer's search for a clear shot. Boaters fleeing the modern condition, and migrants fleeing much worse. Journalist Laura Trethewey's new book, The Imperiled Ocean, Human Stories from a Changing Sea, collects voices from across the globe who together tell a story that is hard to see when viewed on their own. And Laura joins us now for more. It's really nice to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I found this book to be really compelling. I think we're used to stories about the ocean because we hear of overfishing and climate change. And these topics do come up in the book, but it largely focuses on stories of how humans interact with the ocean. In writing this book, what question did you want answered?
Right. So I think I was most driven by what humans wanted from the sea. That's sort of where everything started. But over time, I saw so many different stories emerge about humans looking for a better life on the ocean, humans looking for answers and solutions, and humans looking for beauty and inspiration at the seaside. And so I was looking for what people wanted, but I got a much deeper answer than that.
What was the answer that you got?
That the ocean makes us more human.
In what ways?
Well, it really demonstrates what we want from the ocean and what we rely on it for. And we fight over this place, we celebrate by this place, we pay a lot of money to live by this place. And there are so many extreme reactions that come out around the ocean that I really felt that this was the portrait of the sea.
What is your personal relationship with the ocean?
I grew up in Toronto, and you know, that's not by any ocean. But I had a lot of curiosity about the ocean because it was something that there's a lot of mystery around the ocean. So I was always curious about what's beyond, what's on the horizon. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so I started to read a lot of books about the ocean. I loved Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Joshua Slocum's Sailing Alone Around the World. I love these stories about adventure on the sea. But over time, the book kind of changed, and I started to get more interested in sort of the environmental angles of the sea. And so it really changed throughout the writing of the book. So I started at a place of adventure, and I went to a place of caring about sort of a holistic view of the ocean.
You did mention that, you know, people who live by the sea are obviously connected because they can see it. Why should people who can't see the ocean care about it? Or how can they find that connection with it?
That is such a good question. And I was traveling across Canada the last week in communities that don't have an ocean directly by them. And it is so much harder for people living in Calgary or people living in Saskatchewan to see why their lives connect to the ocean. And I completely understand why they might not know it's important. But the ocean is part of every moment of your day. So
In what ways?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So every second breath we take, for instance, is using oxygen produced by phytoplankton in the sea. The internet that we use on a daily basis as you're scrolling through your phone, that is likely traveling on a fiber optic cable laid on the seafloor. So from a biological dependence to a technological dependence, we have so many connections to the ocean. And people in inland communities, it's so necessary for them to understand how they connect, even if they don't see it, because the ocean really needs our imagination and our collaboration right now.
Throughout the book, you have different stories focusing on different people. And you start the book off with a story about a Hollywood cinematographer. Why did you want to start the book that way?
Right. So this Hollywood cinematographer, he is creating scenes for big box office movies. So he's creating these incredibly spectacular scenes that I think everyone can relate to. And so I wanted to start with somebody who was talking to everybody. And
because we all like going to the movies and using our imaginations?
Exactly, yeah. And if you've seen Titanic or if you've seen Jaws or you've seen these big ocean blockbusters, then there's something about those scenes that get you.
And tragedy.
Exactly, yeah. Tragedy, fear, these really big extreme reactions. So I thought that that was a really great place to start because we can all kind of identify with those scenes.
What did you learn from this cinematographer?
Well, I learned that the ocean can be this place of great transformation. So he is capturing these scenes that can sometimes start in one place, and they often are huge symbolic scenes that mean something for the heart of the movie. So, for instance, one scene that he shot is a music video of Aaliyah, who
Rock the boat?
exactly rock the boat. And during the shooting of that music video, he captured these scenes of her that are very beautiful, they're very cinematic, but they don't hint anything about death. They hint, they're talking about a woman having fun in the water and sort of this sexual undertone. And Aaliyah died shortly after that music video was shot, and the music video completely transformed into sort of a farewell video to this woman, who is now sort of looking back down on Earth from above. And so the ocean scenes that he captured are often transformative, and they're so, there's life and death contained in both of the scenes.
And that had an impact on him too.
Absolutely,
What was
yeah.
that?
After shooting that scene, I mean, he realized how close he was to death at any moment. He was about to get on a plane, leaving, where was it, the Bermuda or Bahamas, I forget exactly. And Aaliyah got on a plane first, and he was supposed to get on that plane shortly afterwards. So he realized sort of how close he was to death at that moment, but also...
Every day that he does it, did you find out why he does it?
Yeah, I mean, he calls the water his office, and I loved that because that's the place where he feels most at home.
Well, you move on and tell the story of a couple that's setting sail from Vancouver on a 2-year journey across the South Pacific. For me, that's just like, why? And their dream is to pack it all up and set sail around the world. And that's not an uncommon dream. Why do you think that is?
So this couple, they wanted to cast off everything that they knew about land. They were going to get rid of the whole 9-to-5 routine. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that.
But you could, I think a lot of people, leaving the 9-to-5, but to go on a boat and sail in the ocean?
I know, and I was really romantic about that decision at first. And then when I saw what this couple went through to make that reality happen, it was tough. And so I got out of that phase very quickly after documenting the work, the money, just the time that they put into making sure that they were completely responsible for themselves out at sea. They had to be their own safety net, basically.
But what about the ocean? It's very unpredictable.
So they had to rely on each other and rely on their skills and their boat to make sure that they were the ones responsible in this really unpredictable place.
To people who don't have this urge to sail across the ocean in a sailboat, how dangerous is it for people to do this?
I mean, I think it's dangerous for the average person, but I think so many people do it on a regular basis. There's, I think, something like 1,000 people right now sailing around the water, sailing around the oceans on these small boats. So it is dangerous, but it's not out of the ordinary. The average person can do it if they have the motivation and the will to learn all the steps. And that's what what this group was going through, was this couple. They were learning how to be responsible and take care of themselves. And we can do that if we put the time in.
And do you think it's making it easier for people to do this with technology? Or do you go back to like how seafaring was done back when?
I think technology is helping people, but it's also making them feel almost a little too safe at sea. So technology today is incredible. You can click on a little point on the ocean and kind of find out what ship is traveling across the sea. Way too much information that you would ever want to know about a boat going across the ocean. We know so much more about the sea from this technology, but that can also feel sort of, it can make people feel a false sense of security when technology breaks down or you're in a place where that technology can't help you. You do need to be responsible beyond it. So it's sort of, you have to make sure that you are not buying into it completely.
So you have to know like the technology and also how things were done before technology.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. You categorize the people who have this dream into 3 camps: the dreamers, the doers, and the doners. Can you explain what you mean by the different categories?
Right, so this...
You were a dreamer once.
I am, yeah, and I'm
Yes.
still a dreamer. So dreamers are people who start off wanting to do this trip across the ocean, sail thousands of nautical miles across the sea. Doers are people who you never see on land because they're out there doing the dream. They're sailing across the ocean. And doners are people who come back to land and they wear a little pin that says how many miles they've gone across the ocean.
Rubbing it in our faces.
Exactly, yeah.
No, that's what they're doing. I think for a lot of us, the sea represents freedom and adventure. And I'm guessing that's probably why people want to do that as well. But you're right, the sea is actually chaotic. Why is there that disconnect between those two things?
Well, it depends how we see it. I think humans will see freedom and adventure in chaos if they go into the ocean thinking of it as a place where they can test themselves and challenge themselves. But if you come from a very different place, if you come from a place of chaos, or you're going to the ocean looking for something you desperately need, you're not going to see an adventure there. You're going to see a threat there. So it is a chaotic place, and some people are sort of surfing those waves and having a great time in the chaos. But I spoke to a lot of refugees and also just very desperate people who are looking to get to the other side, and they don't see adventure there. They want to get off the water as quickly as possible.
Well, let's talk about, you profiled two different individuals. In our conversation, maybe we should clarify, we're talking refugees, migrants.
That's right, yeah. So right now, refugees are classified by the sort of UN definition of that, which is somebody who's fleeing a very severe threat to their life. So a Syrian refugee they are classified as a refugee because they've escaped war and a very real and immediate threat to their life. Then there's economic migrants. That's sort of a different classification where it's people who are looking for maybe a better economic future and they're not fleeing a direct threat to their life.
So the two people that you profile, Hassan is from Syria and Mohammed is from Ghana. And they're fleeing their respective countries and they have to cross the Mediterranean to Europe. How did you find them?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky that I have some family in Germany and they got me into a refugee house during the 2015-2016 refugee crisis in Europe. And so I actually had some time to spend in this refugee house getting to know different people who had just crossed the ocean. So I was in Germany at the time, right place, right time, and I had the connections to get into a place that was off limits to a lot of reporters and journalists at the time.
What was that experience like for you coming from Canada?
Oh my gosh, just eye-opening. One thing that I noticed was I was talking to teenage boys who were 16, 17 years old, and they seemed so much younger than 16 and 17-year-old Canadian boys. They had gone through incredible hardship, and they had gone through chaos, like I mentioned, where no rules applied, where they were crossing borders and slipping past police to get to where they were. And it had very much hardened them. They felt sometimes older than me, 15 years older than what they were. So I saw a real difference between just your average Canadian teenager's perspective and the perspective of somebody who's just gone through the ringer of crossing the ocean and trying to find a safe place to live.
You point out that Africans pay less to the smugglers, but they end up in the ship's hold, while you write that Syrians, and this is what you write, get more room and safety on board. How apparent to you was this hierarchy of migrants?
So yes, so back in when Syrians were still crossing from Libya, they were getting better positions on board boats, but by the time I was talking to people, Syrians were mainly crossing from Greece on sort of inflatable rafts. But yeah, you can see it in the sort of classification once they get to Germany, and they are, Syrians get a lot of, they're usually approved way more quickly for their refugee status in Germany, while somebody like Mohammed, the gay teenager from Ghana who I interviewed, he has had his asylum plea approved, and he's now living undocumented in Germany. And he's not going to get a chance to get a job, get an education. So he is sort of set for a life that is always going to be lived in the shadows. So right away you can kind of see that these classifications between Syrians and Africans it's working on their future already.
One of the things that struck me in this chapter was something called pushback. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so right now in the Mediterranean, there are, when a boat crosses over into Italian or Greek shorelines, sometimes the police will go to meet them, the Coast Guard will go to meet these boats, and we don't necessarily have direct documentation of these pushbacks, but basically it's taking migrants or refugees who have already crossed the water and taking them back out to sea, and basically pushing them back out into the water or taking them back to the original country that they came from. So it's a way of stopping them from making their plea.
And they've, like one of the stories that you mentioned in the book, when they get to land, they would actually rip up the boat. Because in doing that, what does that prevent from happening?
Yeah, so one of the refugees, the Syrian refugee who I spoke to, once he landed on a Greek island, a man ripped apart his boat because that man was afraid of the Greek Coast Guard coming and pushing him back out to sea. But if there was no boat in which to place people, then he couldn't get pushed back out to sea.
They had a better chance.
Exactly, yeah, it was basically a way of making sure they could stay.
You also spent some time picking up plastic debris from the west coast of Canada. You write about the sadness that you yourself felt during this. Why were you sad?
I don't think I'd ever really realized how much destruction that we'd already done to the planet. I was sort of resisting talking about environmental problems in the ocean for a long period of time while I was writing the book, and eventually became so urgent that I had to write it.
Why were you avoiding that?
Because I knew it was going to be a very hard story to tell. And writing about all the plastic that I witnessed washed up on coastlines along BC, there were some days where I just would put my head on the keyboard and have a very hard time writing about a problem that is just becoming incredibly hard to stop. So I think it's very lonely today to sometimes care about an issue that's not having the alarm bells sounded. And so when I was down on the coastline on BC collecting plastic, I saw how plastic had broken down into smaller and smaller pieces. It wasn't just that I could go pick up a bottle and remove it from the water. It had broken down into fibers, it had broken down into tiny chips, less than 5 millimeter in diameter. And so it became really apparent that there was no taking back all this plastic. Sometimes we think that we can undo the damage that we've done to the environment, but it became really clear in that moment that, that plastic is there to stay, and we need to reckon with that and figure out what our next steps are.
And clear up this for me. I've heard, I've read stuff online that it's not a big deal because if an animal in the sea consumes plastic, it'll just come out the other way.
Come out the other side, yeah. Yeah. So there's still a lot of research being done on how much of the toxins or carcinogens in plastic gets transferred to an animal when they ingest it. But we already know that plastic is filling animals' bellies so that they think they're full, and then they might not go eat another piece of food that would be more nutritious. So you hear a lot of stories about sperm whales or turtles or birds opened up after they've died or beached on the sand, and their bellies are filled with plastic because they think they're full. Or another way that it can harm them right now is being tangled in ghost gear. So a lot of this is fishing debris that's sort of been ditched in the water, and it can tangle animals up, and a lot of animals still need to breathe air, so they can't surface to get that critical breath of air, and so they drown in the ocean, tangled in plastic.
I just want to pick up on what you were just talking about. It's trying to avoid writing about this. You do write in the book about the challenges of communicating the extent of environmental damage. What are some of those challenges? Like, is it a matter of getting people to see what's happening, or is it a matter of people believing what they want to believe?
Everybody, I think we're in an age where we're starting to see that people are going to believe their own truth, their own story. And so I tried my best to show human stories that people could find a connection to, but eventually if you tell people all the facts, you tell them the entire story of why plastic is bad for an animal, and they could still choose to not believe that story, and we're seeing that with climate change. There's so much science today that shows that this is happening, and people still choose not to believe. So at that stage, I sort of turned to the emotional response to it. I feel like the ocean grants so many emotional benefits to people, and so if I'm not able to convince people that they should save the ocean for the environment, then I feel like it's compelling to say that you can save the ocean for what it does for humans too. Mm-hmm. That it makes us feel relaxed, it makes us feel at home. That there are so many emotional impacts that we don't see the benefit of.
When you were out in BC, you were with a group called Ocean Legacy, right?
That's right.
And what do they do?
They are collecting tons and tons of marine debris, and they're trying to find a use for something that most of us consider it's plastic that most of us consider garbage. So they're collecting flip-flops, they're collecting bottles, they're collecting all kinds of packaging, and they're trying to melt it down in this type of chemical process called pyrolysis, where they convert it back into fuel and then sell it on the open market and hopefully get a profit from that oil.
Why are they approaching it this way?
So yeah, they get a lot of questions about why they are contributing more oil to the market when instead maybe we should just not be churning out more fuel. I think that they're trying to put a value on something. Right now, we don't see a lot of value in plastic because it's something that we use and then we throw away. So I think that if you can give something a value, then that will make people see that they shouldn't throw it away. And so it's a way of keeping the garbage, keeping the plastic on land.
You note that even though the team you were with would clean up approximately 25 metric tons of plastic in a month, that every day more than that amount is dumped back into the ocean. What keeps them going?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I asked this question to Chloe Dubois, the leader of Ocean Legacy, myself. And I think that if you find a way to confront a challenge, you're going to commit to it. And so that is the way she sees herself making change now. And even though you could look at the statistics and know that maybe you're not making a massive difference, it's still worthwhile to do those actions, I believe.
It's like a drop in the ocean.
It's a drop in the ocean, absolutely. Yeah. But to not take part in a system that you don't believe in, I think that is worthwhile. And if demonstrating to other people is also worthwhile. We have no idea where that story is going to go and who it's going to inspire.
The book covers a lot of topics, including the complex cruise ship industry and a small community of people who live by the water and are in the process of being evicted from their ships. How did you decide which stories to tell in this book?
Yeah, that was very difficult because there's just a bottomless amount of ocean stories out there. So I tried to pick people who were going to open up a bigger discussion about the ocean. Mm-hmm. So I focused on one story in the book was about a scientist who's tracking disappearing species of fish, a sturgeon. Yeah, white sturgeon. And he was really representative of, I felt, all the animals that we were losing, that we didn't get to hear their stories and we didn't get to find out all the different connections that we had to this animal before we disappeared. Mm-hmm. So I saw that story repeating itself again and again and again. So I picked people that way.
What should we know about the sturgeon?
Well, we should first know it's a really cool fish. To fish nerds, this is the coolest fish. It's been around for millions of years. We still don't know exactly how long it's been here, but maybe going back to the Carboniferous era.
It's a huge fish.
It's a huge fish. It's 2 meters, it can be up to 2 meters long and even longer. It looks like this gigantic snake under the surface. When I saw men fishing it on the Fraser River, it just looked like something out of nightmares. But when you get it up, it's quite a beautiful fish. Mm-hmm. And we should also know that the sturgeon is going through a lot of development pressures right now.
Which are?
One of the big things in the Fraser River is that we're taking away a lot of the gravel along the edges of the river, which is where sturgeon lay their eggs. And so one of the problems is that when we remove this gravel, the eggs are not able to hide anymore, and so they're being eaten. We don't necessarily know all the impacts of pollution on sturgeon, and it's showing that juvenile sturgeon who are trying to make the leap to sexual maturity so they can give birth to the next generation, this is the group of sturgeon that's really struggling to survive. So
how do you get people to understand how they relate to sturgeon or to what's happening in the oceans with sharks, and how that reflects back on who they are or on what's happening here on the planet? How do you get them to connect to that?
Yeah, I'm hoping that through human stories that maybe that they will see themselves in a story about a scientist who's trying to find out about a disappearing species of fish. I hope maybe they'll see themselves in that story. Or if they don't see that story as empathetic, then maybe they'll relate to a different story. But I guess the critical part of it is that they see how the stories connect, how each person has a different stake in the ocean.
And how we're all connected.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you so much, Laura, for writing this book. It's so fascinating. It teaches us so much of where we stand in the world and how important the oceans are. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario, and by viewers like you. Thank you.